Hello, everyone. I'm glad you can attend ADDitude's weekly ADHD Experts webinar. Today, we are happy to have Ryan Wexelblatt talking about the social lives of boys with ADHD. When you think about ADHD, what often comes to mind is hyperactive boys who can't sit still, high-energy kids who have trouble making and keeping friends in some cases, or tapping into their executive functions in others. Hyperactive boys have almost become the definition of ADHD for many people. Of course, we all know that girls and women develop ADHD and are increasingly being diagnosed with it, so let's not forget that. But today, it's all about boys. Some parents here today wonder if their child will grow out of his hyperactivity and behavioral challenges, and as a result, they may put off getting help. Other parents struggle to find the right kind of help and therapy to manage the unique challenges that boys with ADHD face. Expert Ryan Wexelblatt works with and treats young male patients with ADHD. He will give us strategies and solutions for improving social skills and executive functions that work especially well for boys. Ryan is a licensed clinical social worker and school social worker who specializes in working with males ages 5 through 22 who present with ADHD, who have anxiety with ADHD, and learning differences. He specializes in teaching social cognitive skills to boys from a male perspective. He is the facilitator of the ADHDitude Facebook group and YouTube channel. Now, before Dr. Wexelblatt makes his presentation, I'd like to conduct a little survey. How would you rate today's webinar? Excellent, very good, fair, or poor? I don't know. Okay. Today's webinar sponsor is Omega Bright. Omega Bright 710 MD is a proprietary high concentrate omega-3 formulation developed by Carol Locke while on the faculty at Harvard Medical School. It is clinically demonstrated to reduce anxiety by 20% in healthy medical students in an NIH-funded, double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trial, and to reduce inflammatory cytokines, IL-6, by 14%. Order now exclusively at omegabright.com. We just wanted to say that to the attendees that the sponsor has no influence on speaker selection or webinar content. You can ask questions of Dr. Wexelblatt and download today's webinar slides from the broadcast panel at the left. If you are having technical trouble with the presentation, click on the troubleshooting tab. Now let's take a look at the results of the poll. And I got that wrong. The poll should be, how old is the boy with ADHD in your life? And the vast bulk of it is between 5 and 13, with some older teens as well. Yes. So it would be 5 to 10 years old mostly, but 11 to 13, healthy representation there. So with all that being said, let me turn it over to Ryan. We look forward to hear what you have to say on this important topic, and we're glad you're here.
All right. Thank you, Wayne. Welcome, everybody. I'm really glad you're here. I figured I should start by telling you a little more about myself and how I kind of got on this path. So I am a licensed clinical social worker and certified school social worker. I am originally from the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania area, specifically an area called Lower Merion. And now, since September, I live in the Atlantic City, New Jersey area, where I have a practice called Ride the Wave Counseling in Linwood, New Jersey. And I also operate a summer camp for boys who are between 11 and 15, and that's called Summer Trip Camp, and that's based in Margate, New Jersey. And my other big job is I'm a dad to a now 21-year-old son who I adopted as an older child when he was 8. I adopted him on my own. My son's name is Austin. And like many kids who had a rough start to their life, Austin had significant struggles with emotional regulation, understanding how to navigate play in social situations. And that was really the antecedent for my interest in social skills. When I started looking around in the area for resources to help him with his social skills, everything I found in the area, we were still living in the Philadelphia area at the time, everything was geared for kids with autism, or the other things I found kind of took this one-size-fits-all approach where kids were grouped together regardless of their cognitive ability or social learning needs. And what I was seeing was a lot of teaching scripted behaviors. So things like, how are you? I am fine. What do you like to do? That kind of thing. And the other thing I found was there was, art therapy, which, teaching social skills through art therapy, which was using a lot of abstract analogies and that, to teach social concepts. And that was way too abstract for my son. He's very concrete, as I'm sure some of your sons are as well. So that's when I decided I needed to kind of figure this out on my own. And I discovered Michelle Garcia Winner, who created social thinking. I stumbled across it and I said to myself, wow, this is not only great, but this is what I'm supposed to be doing for a career. So most of my career has been spent working in schools and creating and running summer camps. Over the years, I've done training in executive function skill development, treating anxiety in kids, training in sexuality and relationship education. I did the social thinking clinical training program at the Social Thinking Clinic in California. And my most recent interest is in gender-based brain differences. And I was drawn to that by the work of Dr. Leonard Sachs and Dr. Michael Gorian, who have amazing books for parents on these topics. And my next venture is I'm going to start the Gorian Institute program to become a Gorian Institute certified trainer on this topic. So what I do has evolved out of what I identified as needs that weren't being met. And there's really no one place where you can go to get all this training. It's something that I put together on my own, which is why I don't know other people who do exactly what I do. That's the number one question I tend to get is, do you know somebody in my town who does what you do? So the other thing I wanted to mention is that, I do think that there's people around the country who do great work. And those individuals, they're few and far between. And realistically, most of them are on the East and West Coast. Not to say there's not people in the rest of the country. I just don't happen to know them. As for specializing and working with boys, that happened organically. One of the things that I came to realize through teaching social skills was that this is a field that is probably 90% women, while the vast majority of individuals who receive help for social skills are boys. And what I found was that a lot of boys who had attended social skills groups, they were being taught to break what I call the male social communication template. And essentially what that means, to put it bluntly, is that they were being taught how to communicate like adult women rather than learning how to be more relatable to their same age peers. So when I started talking about this, when I was presenting at different conferences, it resonated with the moms in the audience. They started sharing their experiences with me and would tell me things like, I saw my son go up to a group of boys and say, may I join you? And I know that's not how little boys talk to each other, but that was what he was taught to do in his social skills group. As for my son, I remember one time I watched him, I think we were at like wrestling practice when he was, maybe 8 or 9, and he was trying to engage with a group of boys and he kept saying, excuse me. And I said to him, Austin, you don't need to say, excuse me. You just go up and enter the conversation. That's the kind of things I'm talking about. So the other reason I went in this direction of specializing and working with boys was because many parents shared with me that their sons had an adverse reaction to participating in therapy because the therapist would try to get them to talk about their feelings week after week, but also because the therapist didn't truly understand ADHD, which is the number one thing I hear from parents, which is we tried therapy. It was a waste of time and my son hated going. So here's what I want you to understand. Therapy, was not designed for boys, okay? The whole idea of sitting across somebody for an hour who asks you how you're feeling or tries to get you to talk about feelings, that's not the way the male brain intuitively operates. That definitely works for some boys, but not for all. The other thing I think we need to talk about is that therapy was not designed to address ADHD. So when I talk about, when people say to me, what do kids with ADHD he need in therapy? And, obviously the answer varies because everyone's an individual. But at the end of the day, what I say is if your son has lagging emotional regulation skills, lagging executive function skills, lagging social cognitive skills, then what he needs is somebody to teach him skills and strategies to compensate for those lagging skills, not simply talk about feelings, or process some, adult perceived, challenge, such as like a divorce from 10 years ago, something like that. The other thing I will tell you, in terms of therapy is that boys often do better with talking when there's movement involved or when they're not required to make direct eye contact. So I very rarely do we're going to sit across from each other thing and talk. We're playing a game. We might be outside. If we're working on, curriculum, we're doing that. But I never kind of do the thing where you're kind of expected to sit there and be quiet, the whole time. And one of the things, sadly, I have to tell parents before they come to see me is I say, please do not tell your son you're going to a therapist, because so many of the guys I see have had these adverse experiences in therapy. And if they hear they're going to a therapist, they come in defensive expecting the same. So I tell parents, I say, just say you're going to like an ADHD guy or, an ADHD coach, that kind of thing. So the other thing people ask me a lot is, what should I look for in terms of getting my son help? And what I will tell you is finding a professional who understands how to relate to boys, how to teach practical strategies to address ADHD-related challenges, and also understands gender-based brain differences is important and very difficult to find. If, that's obviously because that's, asking a lot. What I say is I think finding somebody who truly understands ADHD is what should take precedence. Cognitive behavior therapy, also known as CBT, is an effective modality for treating some aspects of ADHD. It can be helpful in developing self-directed talk, addressing social anxiety. That's what I use it for. It can be helpful in, addressing poor self-esteem, depression as well. One of the things I want to also say is that I always explain to people, to me, ADHD is a learning issue. It's not a mental health issue. It's a learning issue that can have a mental health component, but at the end of the day, it's a learning issue. So if you need to learn how to, develop, better social skills, better executive functioning skills, we have to address that by teaching you, again, these things that you're lacking. And therapy isn't, or traditional talk therapy as it's known, is not about, teaching, right? It's about processing feelings and those kind of things. So the other thing I want to mention is that for myself, the work that I've done training in with social skills, executive functioning, that doesn't come from the mental health field. It actually comes from the speech language pathology field. So I always say that my professional community is speech language pathologists. It's not mental health professionals. Really, the only thing that I tend to use from the mental health field is cognitive behavior therapy. Everything else I use came out of the speech language pathology field. Okay, so I wanted to explain what social learning challenges are. Social learning challenges is a term created by Michelle Garcia Winner, the creator of social thinking. And it's the concept that many kids with ADHD and related challenges, so Asperger's, autism, even kids with, with some learning differences, attachment issues, they don't learn social information intuitively. And these core skills that don't develop intuitively are outlined in what's called the social thinking ILAF model of social cognition. And if you go to the social thinking website, which is socialthinking.com, and just type in ILAF model, that an article will come up. So I want to focus on the most common social learning challenges in kids with ADHD that I see. So number one is perspective taking. So understanding others' thoughts, feelings, and intentions, but also understanding how you come across to others. The next one is what's called gestalt processing, or getting the bigger picture, meaning how do you take different pieces of information, put them together as a whole, and make meaning of them? So the other aspect of this gestalt processing, or getting the bigger picture, is if your son has difficulty with reading comprehension, it's because he struggles with this aspect of executive functioning, or this social learning challenges. It really kind of crosses into both. So for instance, your son might read a chapter and he might only remember small details or irrelevant details. It's because he has difficulty inferring what's the bigger picture from this chapter, or extracting what's important. Okay, that can also happen in conversations. So I see a lot of guys who give too many details when they talk, or they give irrelevant details. And in those cases, what I have to teach them is, how do you share information with somebody? Number one, in a narrative format, because that's also difficult if you have difficulty with getting the bigger picture. But how do you give the right amount of information and relevant information? Other guys I see give too little information, but usually the issue is more giving too much information or irrelevant details or telling the story in a disorganized format. So the other area where we're getting the bigger picture comes into play is with writing. So a lot of kids with ADHD can do okay with creative writing, but when they're given a writing assignment that's structured, they really struggle because their brain makes it hard for them to organize how are they going to put their thoughts down on paper, and then again, how many details do I share and what's important here. The other aspect of this, so this is a big one, is with what we call situational awareness or reading a room. So essentially what that means is how do you go into an unstructured situation, figure out what's happening, and figure out what you should be doing based on the context of the situation. All right. So what I always, and let me actually talk about the last one. The other one is using humor appropriately. A lot of kids with ADHD, they have a great sense of humor and they can understand their own sense of humor, but they have trouble understanding other people's sense of humor. They also have difficulty knowing how to use humor in the right context and with the right people. So that's something that has to be taught. And the other aspect of that is what's called human relatedness. So relating to others' emotional experiences. So, for example, if I tell you something sad, I want you to respond a certain way. If I tell you something enthusiastically, I want you to respond a certain way. If you don't know how to do that, it's going to be hard for us to relate to each other because you're not responding to my emotional experiences, either with a comment, a question, and so on. If we were kind of to look at these social learning challenges on a pyramid, the foundation of this pyramid would be the perspective taking piece. Okay. So moving on to moving on to the next slide. I wanted to talk about why it's difficult to address social learning challenges. So number one, historically, social skills groups, which came out of the speech language pathology field as a way to help kids with autism develop what's called pragmatic language, so really the social skills groups were not designed specifically for kids with ADHD. So what happens is a lot of social skills groups, both in school and outside of school, they teach scripted, socially appropriate behaviors. The other issue is that, kids with ADHD are often placed into these one-size-fits-all social skills groups, like I mentioned before, with kids who have more significant social learning challenges, different cognitive ability, and that doesn't work when you group kids together who have different learning needs. One thing I wanted to mention real quick, Dr. Russell Barkley, who I think most of you here probably know, has said that social skills groups for kids with ADHD are an abysmal failure. And I would respectfully disagree with him a bit. I would say that the research that was done, with the variables that it looked at showed it weren't successful. But we have to question, were the kids grouped correctly together? Were they teaching them scripted behaviors, or were they teaching them how to think in a social context? Did the person who was facilitating the group have any training in this? One of the things I want to mention is that this field of social learning is a relatively new field, and there's no kind of credentialing body for it. There are no requirements. My joke I tell people is, in order to teach social skills, the requirement is, in order to run a social skills group, the requirement is that you have a pulse. All right. So what we need to address is kind of not surface skills, but what we have to teach is how to think in a social context and address these core learning issues that have not developed intuitively. So learning to understand others' thoughts and feelings and how you come across to others, developing an understanding of the bigger picture and improving situational awareness, learning how to relate to others' emotional experiences and use humor appropriately, and also learning how to ask for help and ask for clarification. So a lot of kids with ADHD, they have difficulty identifying when they're struggling or something's not going right, and self-advocacy is not always their strong point. So that's why it's really important that we teach this. In the picture you see here, that is a thought bubble I use when I'm working with kids. So what I do is I hold that thought bubble above my head, I write on it, and I hold it above my head without saying anything. So if we're playing a game or having a conversation, I just do that, and I don't say I'm stopping to do this. I just hold it above my head because I want them to see what I'm thinking. So in this one I wrote, Ben is being an information informer, and the Z's mean like I'm sleeping because I'm bored. So information informer is a term, I don't think it's any in and I don't remember if it's in any of the social thinking books, but I took it from Michelle Garcia Winner. And it's the idea, being an information informer is when you talk at people and you have one-sided conversations about your interests. And the opposite of that, on the other end of the spectrum, is being a social relator, meaning you're relating to others' emotional experiences, you're showing an interest in others, you're talking about things both of you can talk about. So with this, what I did was, when this boy was, just kind of talking at me and rambling on, instead of saying, hey, I'm getting bored, or, we're not having a two-way conversation, I hold up the thought bubble above my head. And the way I frame this is I say, in real life, other people are going to have thoughts about you, and they might be bored with you, but they're not going to express that because they're trying to be polite and be respectful of you. And the older, kids get, the less likely they are to say things like, you're boring, or I don't care about this, So that's why we have to teach how to infer what others' thoughts are based on our words and behaviors. Okay. The other thing I want to mention real quick is that there's a difference between having social anxiety, which is not uncommon in kids with ADHD, and social learning challenges. I use cognitive behavior therapy to address social anxiety. And one of the things I want to mention is that social anxiety is often mistaken for social learning challenges. The reasons why are because boys do not articulate social anxiety. Most do not. They don't even have the language to say, I have social anxiety. And people who are not, really trained in this, they assume that, if you kind of are on the fringes socially, the reason why is because you don't know how to engage, where really it might just be that you have social anxiety. So one of the things I always need to parse out when I meet kids is, do they have social anxiety? Do they have social learning challenges, or do they have both? If they have both, social anxiety always needs to be addressed first. All right. The reason why is because if you are so anxious that you can't engage with others or try things, then that's not going to be really helpful. And I can tell you, I have seen kids who have spent years and years in social skills groups, and they really didn't need it. What they needed was to have their social anxiety addressed. Okay. So with executive functioning, I want to talk about that a little bit. What I focus on is teaching skills and strategies to help develop independence. Because at the end of the day, what we know is it's not your grades that make you successful in life. It's your ability to form social relationships and manage your life independently. So areas I work on are developing self-directed talk, which is lagging in kids with ADHD, improving nonverbal working memory, which is your ability to picture things in the future, moving from being what's called prompt dependent towards independent. So prompt dependent means if you are telling your son, take a shower, do this, do that, right? Then he is prompt dependent, meaning he can't do things without prompts. And essentially you are acting as his executive functioning. So what we want to teach is, how do you move towards being independent? The other area I work on is improving motivation and resiliency to persevere through non-preferred tasks. And I tell kids, I say, my concern is not your grades. My concern is that when you graduate school, that you're going to be able to function if you go to college or start a job and whatever. In this picture here, what you're looking at is a strategy I use to help. It's called backwards planning. I learned it from Sarah Ward and Kristen Jacobson of Cognitive Connections. And this is about, you start with the end result in mind and visualize what you want the end result to look like. And then we plan backwards from there in order to complete a task. So how you can help improve your son's executive functioning. So number one, we have to create scaffolding to help teach new skills and shift responsibility from you to your son. We have to put parameters around screen time, because that's a big variable here. So the recommended amount from what I've read is, no more than an hour during the week, no more than 2 hours on weekends. And that includes the phone, by the way. The other thing that really helps develop executive functioning is unstructured play and hanging out time that is not directed by an adult. That is one of the best ways to develop executive functioning. And unfortunately, so many kids today are not going outside and playing outside or hanging out with friends. They're inside on video games. So let me talk a little bit about what's detrimental to the development of your son's executive functioning. So number one, you constantly acting as his executive functioning. So a lot of times I will meet with parents who check the homework, they tell their son what his homework is, they do everything for him, they completely act for his executive functioning, particularly with school. And when I tell them, I said, look, if you want this to improve, you have to stop what you're doing. And sometimes they'll say, well, I can't allow my son to fail. And I said, well, here's a choice. You can either help him develop these skills now, or you can try to help develop them when he's out of high school and the support is gone. And that, in my experience, tends to not work out too well. Unfortunately, I see a lot of kids whose parents have acted as their executive functioning their whole life. They go away to college and they are either home by November of their freshman year, or they do not make it, or they make it to the end of the semester, but basically have failed everything. And the reason why is not because of their intelligence or their ability, but it's because they lack the executive functioning skills to function independently because their parents acted as their executive functioning. Overscheduling, having kids in a million activities is also not helpful for developing executive functioning. Helicopter parenting or micromanaging everything is not helpful. And the other thing, I see a lot with the guys I work with is that they become very skilled at learned helplessness. So they try to do something new, they get frustrated and they say, I'm stupid or I can't do it. And then their parents say, oh, it's okay, honey, I'll do it for you, And what they learn is that if they act helpless, they will have an adult do something for them, or they learn how to get out of non-preferred tasks. And that also is not helpful to developing executive functioning. So, giving your kids chores to do, free play, kind of really basic things are the ways to develop executive functioning. And unfortunately, again, it's the ways that we're moving away from in our society. So the other thing I want to tell you real quick is that the way I kind of sell executive functioning to kids is I say, this is about you having more time to yourself. And I said, if you can be flexible enough to use the strategies I'm going to teach you, you will have more time to yourself. Okay, so one of the questions I hear in my Facebook group and from parents a lot is, why is it so hard to find help, given the prevalence of ADHD? So here's what I want you to understand. Number one, mental health professionals, including myself, in graduate school, get little to no training in ADHD. They get no education or training in addressing ADHD-related challenges or gender-based brain differences. And just to give you some context with this, I did a training for mental health professionals in the Philadelphia area last year, and I asked them, how many of you, by a show of hands, had any training in ADHD? Out of the 44 people there, only one raised their hand, and she was a neuropsychologist. So I think that says something. Another reason why it's hard to find help is, many executive functioning strategies, as I've seen in books, they're not visual enough for this generation and they're not kid friendly. So how do kids of this generation learn things? They go on YouTube, right? So if you're not doing things that are visual and kid friendly, they're most likely not going to use them. The other thing I can tell you I see a lot is that a lot of executive function or ADHD coaching focuses solely on academics, and it works fine for highly academically motivated individuals or kids with a really mild profile, more inattentive profile with ADHD. But for kids who are not academically motivated and kids with a more hyper impulsive profile, it doesn't always work that well. In terms of why it's so hard to find help with social skills, well, number one is the reason I mentioned, is that there's no requirements to teach social skills. And realistically, no fault of their own, most people who run social skills groups have no specific training or education. In schools a lot, what we see is that when teachers or speech language pathologists have to teach social skills in school, they're handed a book and say, hey, teach this, without any training. And again, the last piece is that, and this is a conservative number, that, about 90% of the individuals who teach social skills to boys are women who very understandably have never been part of a male peer group, and they don't necessarily understand the nuances of male-male social communication. That being said, I want to be really clear that women can absolutely teach social skills to boys and can teach boys how to be more relatable to other boys, but they have to learn this stuff. And I do know women who are great at it, by the way, I want to add here. Okay. In this picture, this is about how guys make small talk. So one of the things I was learning a lot was that a lot of kids who in social skills groups were asking other boys things like, what are your hobbies? And what I find is I have to unteach kids things that they learned in social skills groups. And I teach the concept of small talk and how do you make small talk specifically with guys? What kind of questions sound natural and organic to ask? So such as, what games do you play? What YouTubers do you watch? Have you seen this meme? Those kind of things. Okay, so in terms of where do you start and what do you address first, I'm going to tell you what takes precedence for me. So number one is start by educating yourself through the wonderful resources of things like ADDitude magazine, and they post so many good articles, on a daily basis. And the other thing is I think you really need to educate family members and other people who might not fully understand ADHD, because in my experience, ADHD is often seen as a character flaw by people who don't get it, and by professionals who don't really get it, it's often seen as a parenting issue or a family dynamic issue. So what takes precedence for me is, number one, addressing social learning challenges, because improving social competency is a very slow and long process. And to be honest, it's one I find parents get very impatient with. And here's what I explain to them. If you have a 12-year-old, okay, and there's these certain, skills that your son has not developed intuitively in 12 years, I cannot teach him those skills in 3 months. Here's the analogy I use. It's like saying to somebody, okay, I'm going to teach you trigonometry, but I expect you to learn, but you have no background in math. You don't even know how to add single digits, but I expect you to learn single digit addition all the way up to trigonometry within 3 months. It's not realistic. This is a long process. Okay. Developing resiliency to persevere through non-preferred tasks and solve problems independently is a huge one for me. And developing age-expected independence. So again, moving away from prompt dependence towards independence. This picture here is from a group I do called How to Hang Out, and that's for guys in middle school. For those of you not in the States, about ages 11 to 14. And what we do is exactly what it sounds like. We learn how to hang out with other guys. So it's not a social skills group. We're not sitting around role-playing scripted behaviors. We're learning how to do things. So in here, the guys were learning how to make grilled cheese, and I throw some executive functioning work into this, but I don't tell them that. So the whole idea is that you learn how to have fun and develop some independence in an unstructured social situation. And my role in this group is I do a lesson, based in social thinking concepts. And then my idea is I pull back because I don't want to be directing the conversation. I don't want to be prompting. I only intervene when necessary. So just a few things that I want to talk about, what I do and what I have coming up. So you are more than welcome, if you're not there already, to join the ADHD Dude Facebook group I have. It's a really great community. I post videos and information pretty much on a daily basis. I'm also going to have an online course coming out for parents called Executive Function Crash Course. And I'm going to have another one called Social Skills for Boys that is also for parents. One thing I want to clarify is that the work I do around executive functioning and developing independence, that is, both for boys and girls. It's not male specific. The work I do around social skills is male specific. And the reason why is because I don't have the experience of growing up as a girl. I don't know what that's like. So is there stuff that I teach that is relevant to girls and could be? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, I grew up male. My friends were male. And that's what I think I have a unique skill in being able to teach, because again, I'm one of the few guys in this field. I also offer online parent coaching. I do not do much online work with kids because I just find it's not effective for a lot of them. I do have some guys I work with online, but I won't do it, with ones who are younger than 11, just because it's difficult for them. In the summer, I do what's called summer trip camp, and it's a day camp. We also do an optional overnight trip, and really what we focus on is building executive functioning and social thinking skills and independence through an active program. So there are no academics at all. We work on things like learning how to conceptualize time, improving nonverbal working memory, or your ability to think ahead into the future, planning things out, learning how to be flexible for the sake of being part of a group. And we're out every day. We'll go to the beach, and it's a lot of fun. And the whole idea, again, is to learn these skills while being active and learning them experientially. And then I have my private practice, Ride the Wave Counseling in Linwood, and that's separate from my ADHD Dude coaching practice, which is online. So you are welcome to sign up for my mailing list to be notified when my course is released, and that's ADHDdude.com. And you're welcome on social media. It's ADHD Dude on Facebook and YouTube, and on Instagram, it's the ADHD Dude. And again, I like to post things about different strategies I do in sessions with kids and just basic all-around concepts that are helpful to parents as well. So one of the things, that some of the challenges I wanted to talk about that parents face in helping their sons is, number one, as I mentioned at the beginning, a lot of the kids I work with have had sometimes multiple unproductive experiences with therapy. And then many parents, they say, okay, we're not doing this again because they're kind of led to believe that, all therapy is the same, so it won't be helpful. And one of the things I actually recently read from Dr. Gorian was that I think it's 1 out of 4 or 1 out of 3 males, drop out of therapy. And a lot of, mental health professionals would say, well, that's because men have to be macho and, they can't accept help. And that's actually not the reason why. The reason why is because therapy is not really designed for them. The other thing that challenge I find is when parents become impatient, that progress is not happening at a speed they want. So they become frustrated and then say, we're done with this. Another big issue I find is not knowing what questions to ask professionals. And what I tell parents is you really have to dig deeply and ask really relevant questions, because I will tell you, anybody can say they specialize in ADHD. That doesn't mean they necessarily have any specific training or education. And, if you go on like Psychology Today, find a therapist, and if you do a search for ADHD, you'll find that most of the clinicians, the therapists on there say that they specialize in ADHD. And again, that's why you really have to do your homework and ask relevant questions. Another thing I find is that parents often deal with ADHD reactively rather than proactively. So instead of teaching skills to help with emotional regulation and help build executive functioning and help build social cognitive skills, they look for help after something has happened. And you know what? It's better late than never, but I always say it's better to teach skills proactively rather than reactively. Another thing, this time of year, particularly, and in June, is when I get the phone calls of people saying, I thought he would grow out of this, or I thought he would mature this year. So a lot of times people are hopeful that their son will just mature out of his difficulty with social skills. And, really it doesn't work that way, because the older we get, the more social expectations are on us and the more other kids expect more from us socially. So, and if you can't meet those expectations, you're going to struggle socially, which is part of the reason, by the way, why a lot of kids with ADHD, or a lot of boys with ADHD, they gravitate towards younger kids because they can relate to them better, or they gravitate towards adults because adults are patient and kind with them, where their similar age peers are not going to be so patient or empathetic with them. The other challenges many parents face is, there's just a lack of professionals who have the skill set to address these lagging skills. And the last piece is I find that there's a lot of misinformation and a lack of education about medications. And one of the things I really want to emphasize, and I tell parents, is that if you have questions about medication, please consult a licensed physician. Please do not go on Facebook or go in, ADHD groups and ask people for opinions about medication. Because what I see a lot happening on social media is other parents respond with misinformation or opinions about medication that are not based in facts. Everyone is unique. Every kid responds to medications differently. And that's why it's really important to consult with a licensed physician rather than people who are not, licensed medical professionals. So please visit the ADDitude magazine ADHD and Boys section, where you can watch my videos, and you can also submit a question for me to answer. And my apologies, my spell check on my computer spelled ADDitude wrong here. And here's a link to the page. And you can also watch old videos on my ADHDitude YouTube page as well. Okay, so I'm sure there's some very interesting questions here that I'm looking forward to hearing. So, yeah.
Yeah, lots of them. Several, actually, talking about a child exploding when he loses at a game, and it's sort of turning off his peers. There's unhealthy levels of competitiveness, and the peers sort of react, as you would imagine, not too well to the outbursts. So these parents are looking for tips on how to calm down their child or give him perspective on his over-competitiveness.
Yeah. So one of the things I will say is, in my experience, when kids are in organized sports and they are emotionally reactive, a lot of times other boys will have more leniency for that than they would at, like, for instance, during recess during a game. So that's one thing. But, if your son is really emotionally reactive and has tremendous difficulty, or you see it's turning off the other kids, then I would say you have to rethink whether that particular sport is right for him at this time right now, or maybe his brain development just hasn't reached the point where he has emotional regulation skills to handle that right now. I want to tell you real quick some of the things I see a lot of guys do well with. I see a lot of guys do well with, obviously martial arts is a big one. Most people know, but things that other people don't know is I see a lot of guys do really well with wrestling. Gymnastics is another one as well. And what I see kids not do so well with are sports like baseball, because baseball, there's a lot of sitting around and a lot of kids with ADHD can't tolerate boredom. I see a lot of kids not do well with basketball because basketball can be pretty physical. With hockey, ice hockey, I see some kids do well with. But, the other thing I will tell you is that before your son has a practice or a game, you have to do what we call front loading, meaning you have to talk to him about what's going to happen, what the game's going to look like, how he might feel, and what is the strategy if he starts to get overwhelmed. And you have to have a concrete plan. And I would also say, talk about how is he going to exit from the situation in a way that's expected. Okay, so at least he knows that there's a strategy here. Do I expect him to use that every time? Of course not. But if he goes in prepared, knowing that he might have some more emotional reactivity, that's going to help a little bit, and it's going to help the process if you do have to pull him out because he's getting upset. And the last thing I will tell you is don't get into an argument or debate about it, okay? I see a lot of parents try to reason with their kids. The other thing I should have mentioned is one of the obstacles I see with parents a lot is a lot of parents mistake their son's intelligence or ability to articulate himself as maturity. So I see parents who let their sons decide whether they're going to come to one of my groups or work with me. And what I always ask them, and I say, does your son have the emotional maturity of the foresight to know what he's going to need? And sometimes that resonates with parents and sometimes it doesn't. But the biggest thing here, kind of going back to this, is to not engage with an argument or try to reason with him when he's upset, because he cannot learn when he's upset or agitated.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's good advice. Several questions about ADHD medication, and they're saying, could that be the source of social anxiety issues?
Okay, so that's a good question. I don't want to address that because I am not a licensed physician. I cannot give medical advice. What I can tell you is in my experience, social anxiety develops two ways. It either develops from a kid who's just naturally anxious and has always been anxious. And as we know, there's about 30% of individuals, roughly, who also present with anxiety as well as ADHD. Then there's another group I see of guys with more like a hyperactive impulsive profile who, have a lot of negative social experiences. And when they get to high school around 15 or 16, they tend to quiet down a bit. But what's happened is they've had so many negative social experiences that they develop some social anxiety because it's hard for them to recognize that other kids are going to respond better to them. So they just have kind of retreated into themselves because they don't want to, be shamed anymore like they were when they were younger.
Mm-hmm. Several questions about cognitive behavior therapy. First, could you just give a thumbnail description of what it is? Some people don't know. And the second is, how is it used to improve social skills in boys?
Okay, so cognitive behavior therapy, the whole idea with it, and really what I would suggest is read online because I can't, do it justice by explaining it. But it was developed by Aaron Beck at the University of Pennsylvania, and the whole idea with it is that we have thoughts that lead to feelings, and then those feelings lead to actions or lead to some kind of avoidance, and that you can learn to change your thought process by learning to speak to your thoughts. One thing I do want to mention is that CBT can be tricky with kids with ADHD because they lack self-directed talk. So that's one of the concepts I really teach is what I call using your inner coach, that self-directed voice in your head, because that's lagging. And inner coach is a term I got from Leah Coopers, who created Zones of Regulation curriculum. But we have to teach how to use that voice to your advantage. And in terms of with social skills, like let me give you an example. So a lot of social thinking, the social thinking material looks similar to CBT. So for instance, there's something called a social behavior map, where we look at your behavior in the context of the situation and whether it was expected or unexpected. If your behavior was unexpected within the context of the situation, then we talk about how did others respond to you. Okay. And then we talk about how did others treat you based on, or I'm sorry, we talk about if your behavior is unexpected in this situation, what are others' thoughts about you? Then how are others going to treat you based on their thoughts about you? And how are you going to feel about yourself based on how you're treated? So really, we're kind of breaking these concepts down and kind of looking at it, as this template of, others' perspective and how they're going to treat you and relate to you as a result. It's something that I could talk about forever, but what I just want to clarify is that CBT is not designed to address social learning challenges, but it can be helpful definitely in addressing social anxiety and addressing different kind of what we call thought distortions, which are also very common in a lot of kids with ADHD. And again, if somebody is interested in this, they can learn more. You can watch my videos and also go to the Social Thinking website. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of buzz about being prompt dependent. Can you give an example of how you work with teens on moving from being prompt dependent towards independent?
Sure. So I'll give you an example. This past week, I saw a boy who's 15, and he is completely prompt dependent. His mother manages every aspect of his life, from getting up to making lunch, to telling him, what to do, telling him what he has for homework. And, this is the example I was thinking of. I said to them, so where does the release of responsibility happen where you stop acting as his executive functioning and he starts acting as his executive functioning? And the reason why I asked her that was because she said to me, I can't let him fail in school. And she's a teacher. I completely get where she's coming from. And what I said was, his grades are not an indication of his ability or your parenting. Unfortunately, I think we have to kind of look at the bigger picture of this as well, is that, schools aren't teaching necessarily, they're not teaching independence, or they're not teaching how to go from prompt dependence to independence, because a lot of supports put in place by IEPs and 504 plans, they're all about prompting. Okay. So what we have to do is we have to focus on this, again, this release of responsibility. So, and I have a slide in here about it. So we go from, we have to create scaffolding, which is basically an outline how to do something. And visual scaffolding is best. And we talk about, okay, you're going to watch me do this, then we're going to do it together, then I'm going to help you if needed, and then you're going to do it on your own. And that's how we move from prompt dependence towards independence. The other way is we have to put strategies in place to help develop self-directed talk and nonverbal working memory. And those are the things that I'm actually going to cover in my executive function crash course, the most common strategies that I teach families for that.
Mm-hmm. Believe it or not, lots of questions about kids having what they call motor mouths. They're talking constantly, and they're concerned, the parents are concerned that their kids are really turning off their peers by just flooding them with whatever thought comes into their head. And they're just saying, how does one go about sort of limiting that?
Yeah. So what I'm going to tell you is the way you start with that is by sharing your own internal dialogue. So for instance, if your son is having a one-sided conversation with you, he's talking at you about Pokemon or Fortnite or whatever, you have to say out loud, I'm feeling kind of bored with this conversation because you're just talking at me and telling me facts about things or talking about your interests. And, we're not really talking about things that we can both talk about or we both enjoy. And one of the things I want to tell you is a lot of parents, when I say that to them, they say, oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to hurt his feelings. And what I say to that is if you are worried about protecting your son's feelings when it comes to social, then you cannot teach him how to navigate socially in the most effective way because you're protecting his feelings. And really, either you can teach him this and he could be hurt by you, somebody who he knows loves him unconditionally, or he can be told by other boys to shut up or you're annoying. I'd rather he learn it from you because he knows that you have an emotional investment in him. So that's number one, sharing, this internal dialogue, and also asking him, instead of saying you're giving me too many details, ask him, say, do you think that, if you were talking to, one of your buddies right now, would they be interested in this conversation? So what that's doing, it's helping him develop self-directed talk around perspective taking, but also reflecting without telling him directly that he's talking too much. So, teaching, one of the things I always say is that teaching social is teaching accountability. We have to learn how to be accountable to others in order to interact with others. So please do not worry about hurting your son's feelings. And, again, you want to share your inner thought process with him so he understands what your perspective is. That's what will help him develop perspective taking skills. And it's even okay to say, so my thought is right now, or what I'm thinking right now is this. You're boring me. So, yeah.
A couple of parents asked that. Should they be blunt about it? That's so you answered that.
Yeah.
Several parents have talked about their kids being stars on social media, being able to, they're very popular. And yet, when they get out in public or face to face with their friends, they have very few social skills, and they seem to, as a result, they aren't invited to parties or other things.
Right.
How does one sort of ease that transition or make the kid or help the kid be as fluent face to face as he is in the social media?
Yeah. So what I'm going to say is that the number of Snapchat or Instagram followers your son has is no indication of his social skills. Okay. Anybody can accumulate a lot of followers. And I don't think that that's a good indicator of, to kind of look at and say, oh, well, he has all these friends online. They're not friends. They're people who follow him. One of the things I teach kids is that there's a difference between, one of the things I teach is how do guys form friendships kind of on a hierarchy. And what I teach kids is that what I call, quote, gaming friends are the same as strangers. They're essentially a person a stranger who you don't know that you speak to for a specific purpose. Because a lot of times, kids will say, I have friends, they're on Xbox, or I have friends, they're on Fortnite.
Yes.
But here's the reality. They actually tend to know nothing about that person. They probably don't even know their name. They know their gamer tag. And if you listen to the conversation, there's really no level whatsoever of intimacy, even like getting to know somebody. It's all about the game. So these relationships that they have online are very superficial. One of the things that happens with kids with ADHD, the guys I work with who struggle socially, is some of them, not all, but they tend to try to use social media as a way to gain social validation. So I've seen kids who spend every waking moment on Snapchat, and they're basically, and this is not just kids with ADHD, it's a lot of kids, they're looking for validation, they're looking for acknowledgement because they're not getting it from their peers in real life. So if anything, what I'm going to tell you is limit their social media time, okay? Because there is plenty of research that shows the more you're on social media, the more it can contribute to depression. What we want to teach them is how to be more relatable in person, how to show an interest in others, and social media is not an indicator of that at all. Mm-hmm. This is a topic I can talk about forever. So I'm just trying to give you a short answer here.
Right.
Yeah.
Would you have a game plan though once you wean them off the social media to maybe increase the face-to-face time, or some kind of script or game plan on how to be able?
Well, the biggest challenge in that is really getting parents to control the screen time and control the social media time. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I explain to kids is that every moment you spend on Snapchat or Instagram looking for validation, that's time is taken away from you being around kids who are really going to appreciate you and enjoy being with you, right? Because you're looking for that from complete strangers or people who you don't really have a relationship with. Mm-hmm. So as with most things I do, I sell it to the kids first. I also am very direct with them and say, look, if you don't feel great about yourself and you find that, okay, this makes me feel better when I get, recognition on Instagram, that's not real. That's not somebody who's really invested in you and likes you for you, right? Anybody can press a like button, So right. What I really try to do is one, I work on helping kids understand how do you, if they're younger, about structuring a play date. What does that look like? Or hanging out. How do you go through the steps of hanging out? Because a lot of kids I see, they have school friends, but they don't know how to go from school friends to what I call outside of school friends. So we actually have to teach them how to do that. How do you take a friendship to the next level? Because they don't get that intuitively.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
A lot of parents have asked about their sons are very, very hesitant to go up to a group,
mm-hmm.
Even people they know in some cases, to sort of join in a conversation. They wanted to know if there were any kind of icebreakers or approaches that they could pass along to their sons to get them to overcome that fear of being afraid to break into a conversation that's already going on?
Yeah, so that can happen for a few reasons. Number one, it could happen because they lack situational awareness, or what we call getting the bigger picture. So they're not reading the social situation accurately. So we have to teach them how to kind of break it down and read the situation accurately, and what would be an expected way for you to enter into that conversation. So that's one reason. Another reason could be social anxiety. And one of the things I want to explain about social anxiety is that the way you learn to move through social anxiety is putting yourself in uncomfortable situations that are a challenge for you and learning you can get through them, and then kind of reflecting on that. And one of the things that happens with a lot of parents is when their kids have anxiety, they accommodate their kids' anxiety rather than pushing them through it because they don't want to upset them. So unfortunately, a lot of parents do the exact opposite of what they should be doing. In terms of entering, a group, what I would say is this is all context dependent. So it's not about a particular icebreaker or saying, hey, what are your hobbies? It's about learning how to read the situation, or, about if they have social anxiety, about learning how to, what I call establishing presence, meaning how do you show that you're interested in being part of a group. One thing that's really nice about boys that is not the same with girls is that boys can be part of a group without saying much. I've known, kids who are absolutely loved and they don't say much, but they show that they want to be a part of a group and they're warm. And, girls can't really do that because there's so much back and forth between girls, whereas with boys, you cannot say much. And as long as you're present and show that you want to be part of a group, you can be okay. Mm-hmm. So I guess the short answer is there's no one easy answer for this because it's so context dependent.
Yeah. A mom writes, I have 2 sons with ADHD. One of them has an added layer of Asperger's. Do you have any adjustments to these recommendations that you just made for boys with Asperger's and ADHD?
Yeah. So one thing I want to say real quick is I look at ADHD, Asperger's being on one long continuum. In Europe, people, we don't talk about 3 different types of ADHD. They talk about one type. And I think eventually we'll look at this as all on one long continuum. The variables that really kind of separate individuals with Asperger's or higher verbal autism are, number one, their level of anxiety, because they tend to be more anxious. But the other one is their level of social motivation. So that's really kind of a big piece here, because for kids with Asperger's, if they're not socially motivated, then essentially what we have to teach them is how to fake being interested in others. So for the sake of others, and that is not easy and it is not fast. Okay. And then again, if this is more anxiety based, we have to help them develop resiliency and learn how to manage their anxiety as well.
Once again, several questions about what are some good questions to ask professionals about their experience with ADHD. Do you have anything specific or just...
Yeah. So what I would just ask them directly, say, do you address executive functioning challenges? If so, how? If their answer is, well, I'm going to teach you to make lists, my answer is, I don't know if that's the best strategy, because in my experience, lists do not work for most kids with ADHD. They're not visual, and that's what I find a lot of what therapists tell parents is just make lists and hang up around the house. And most parents have found that, in my experience, that doesn't work. The other thing is I would ask is, how do you address the social piece? If they say, well, we'll role play, then I would say, okay, well, what about how do you teach that social interaction changes based on the context of the situation? That's the other thing I'd ask as well. If they're going to work on emotional regulation, I would ask them, what do you use to do that? What techniques do you use? Do you use CBT? Do you use DBT? Do you use zones of regulation or a specific program? What I'm always looking for is some, concrete examples of, rather than say, well, we talk about it and process the feelings around it. Yeah. So I think what you're looking for is specifics, really. Yeah.
And I guess this would be the last question because we're running out of time, but this mom has a 12-year-old son, and she says, do you have any scripts or recommendations on how the son can possibly explain his ADHD and his behaviors to his peers?
Yeah. So one of the things, to my whole point about why I don't like social skills groups and why they're ineffective is we don't ever want kids to follow scripts. What
Okay.
I will tell you the first time I meet kids is I explain ADHD to them in a way that makes sense, because 99% of the kids I see have never had ADHD explained to them. So, and I explain it kind of as, your prefrontal cortex is developing a few years behind the rest of your brain, and it'll catch up eventually. And in terms of explaining it to other kids, what I would just really say is other kids don't want some in-depth explanation.
Right.
What I'd say is it's the way my brain works right now, and it's going to catch up, but it's just not there yet. And that's what I always want to emphasize to kids, that ADHD is not your identity. It's not who you are. Okay. It's a description of how your brain works.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, I think the hour is up. That was terrific, Ryan. Really.
Thank you.
Really great advice. And
thanks everyone who was here participating. I hope this was helpful.
Yeah. There were several calls for you to come back and explain other stuff, so maybe we'll have to schedule that.
I'd love to.
In the future. Okay. Yeah. So thanks for being here again and sharing your expertise, and also to all of the attendees for being here. And once again, today's sponsor is Omega Bright. Omega Bright 70/10 MD is a proprietary high concentrate omega-3 formulation developed by Dr. Carol Locke while on the faculty at Harvard Medical School. It is clinically demonstrated to reduce anxiety by 20% in healthy medical students in an NIH-funded, double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trial, and to reduce inflammatory cytokines, IL-6, by 14%. Order now exclusively at omegabright.com. And next week, we will have Dr. David Anderson talking about how to manage your teen screen time. And we could all use help on that front. So hopefully we will see you there.
I will be tuned in.
Okay. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for attending.
Bye-bye.
Bye.